You ever get that feeling, you know, when you're trying to really understand something huge, something that feels like it's just out of reach?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe thinking about God has felt like that for you sometimes, just too big to really get your head around.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we've got some really interesting material from the Countenance Project.
Yes, we're looking at a specific piece they've called Too Big to Measure. And our goal here, I think, is to explore this idea,
Yeah.
this question of why we can't fully measure or, comprehend God.
Right.
And maybe see how that inability isn't actually a limitation of God, but maybe points towards his glory. And maybe even gives us a reason to trust.
That's a fascinating angle.
Yeah.
Because it's common feeling, isn't it, hitting that wall, the limit of our understanding, especially with the divine.
Absolutely.
So let's jump into one of the core ideas here. It starts with something pretty simple, actually. The idea that, well, anything you use to measure something else, it has to be bigger or more comprehensive in some way than the thing it's measuring.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Like a ruler is longer than the inch it measures.
Exactly. Or think about a teacup. Can it hold the whole ocean?
No, obviously not. Or, your kitchen scales trying to weigh a star. It's just not going to happen.
Right. And the piece then takes that idea and applies it to our minds and the concept of God, suggesting our minds, powerful as they are, might not be built to contain or fully define something infinite.
It's a powerful analogy. It's suggesting the limitation isn't in God, but maybe in the measuring tool itself, our finite minds.
So it's not just about being big, like the ocean versus the teacup. It's almost like, are our minds the right kind of tool for measuring infinity?
That seems to be the point. And the piece suggests this isn't the failure of our intellect. It actually says this inability, this sense of being overwhelmed, could be a signal that you're standing before glory.
Wow, that reframes it completely. Instead of frustration, it's awe.
Exactly. And it leads to another really crucial point they make. God isn't presented here as, say, a problem to be solved, or like a specimen to dissect under a microscope.
Okay.
The idea proposed is that God is someone to be worshipped. Because think about it. If we could fully grasp God, test him, measure him with our science or our logic.
Then he'd be smaller than our tools, limited by them.
Precisely. He'd be subject to them and therefore maybe lesser than them.
Yeah.
Which sort of defeats the purpose, doesn't it?
It really does make you think. The very fact that God seems beyond our full grasp, that itself could be part of what defines him as God.
Right. And this connects to that theological idea of God being wholly other.
Okay, wholly other. What does that mean, practically speaking, in this context? Is it's just like really, really different?
Well, it's more than just different or bigger. Wholly other implies a difference in kind and fundamental nature. Like God exists outside the very categories and frameworks we usually use to understand reality.
So maybe our usual mental boxes just don't fit?
That seems to be the implication. Our finite minds trying to grasp something truly infinite and fundamentally different.
So if that's the case, this infinite, wholly other being, how do we even relate? The piece brings in a quote from the Bible here, doesn't it? From Job.
Yes, Job 11.7. It asks, can you discover the depths of God? Can you discover the limits of the Almighty?
And the answer seems pretty clear.
Right. The text points out that the implied answer is obviously no, because if we could find the limits, well then, he wouldn't be the Almighty, the limitless one.
It kind of defines itself.
Exactly. And the source uses some helpful analogies for what God is not. It says it's not like climbing a mountain, where you eventually reach the top, plant a flag, see the whole view.
Right. You haven't conquered or solved God by understanding something about him. It also says he's not like a machine you can just take apart.
Yeah, disassemble, see how all the bits work, put it back together and say, okay, now I get it.
Or like a puzzle, even a really complex one.
Yeah.
Eventually, with enough effort, you can solve a puzzle, see the whole picture.
But God isn't presented as something with edges that we can eventually find if we're clever enough. These analogies all point to things that are ultimately measurable or solvable by us.
So the core message keeps coming back.
That God isn't a riddle to be cracked, but rather a person, someone who invites relationship, worship.
Okay, but then there's a twist, right? Because even if God is immeasurable, the piece argues he's not totally absent or disconnected from our measurable world.
Exactly. This is where it gets really interesting. It says God leaves traces of himself in everything that can be measured.
Traces. like footprints or echoes.
Kind of, like you can't see the wind itself, maybe,
Yeah.
but you see the leaves moving, you feel it on your skin, you see its effect.
Okay, so what are some examples of these traces in the measurable world?
Well, the piece gives a really simple one, measuring our days. Sunrise, sunset.
Which we normally think of as, astronomy, Earth rotating.
Sure, but the text frames it differently. It talks about the Earth spinning silently under his command. It suggests that the very order and predictability we measure is itself a trace of his sustaining power.
That's a subtle shift, but it changes how you see it. And then there's the quote from the Psalms.
Ah, yes. The heavens declare the glory of God.
Declare it, like announce it.
Yeah, announce it, point to it. The sheer scale and beauty of the universe, the text suggests, points beyond itself to the Creator. It declares glory, but it doesn't fully contain or explain God. Creation is like a giant signpost.
Pointing towards the immeasurable.
Right. And then there's another verse they bring in from Isaiah 40.1.
What does that one say?
It asks, "Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, or with the breadth of his hand marked off the heavens?"
Ah, so it flips the perspective?
Totally. It emphasizes that God is the one doing the measuring, setting the scale of the universe. It puts our attempts to measure him into, well, a pretty humbling context.
Okay, so God is immeasurable, that leaves traces. And he's the ultimate measurer. But what happens when we, in our finite, measurable lives, actually encounter something of this immeasurable reality? The piece talks about Moses, right?
Yes, the encounter on the mountain.
Yeah.
Moses asks to see God's glory directly.
And God says, yes, no.
It's interesting. God doesn't just say no, but he doesn't give Moses the full direct view either. He says essentially, you can't see my face and live.
Too intense, too overwhelming.
Apparently so. So God shields him. He puts Moses in a cleft of a rock, a small, very measurable physical space, and covers him with his hand while his glory passes by.
And Moses only sees the back.
The afterglow, as the text puts it. Just the trailing edge of that immense presence. And even that tiny glimpse was overwhelming. It made Moses' face shine so brightly he had to wear a veil later.
Wow. So even a shielded indirect encounter with the immeasurable is transformative. Almost dangerous.
It suggests a fundamental gap, maybe, between our finite nature and the sheer intensity of infinite glory.
And the piece says that kind of encounter, that brush with the immeasurable, it makes us shine, it makes us tremble, it changes us.
Yeah.
It makes you think, doesn't it? About moments in your own life, maybe not seeing God's glory on a mountain, but moments of just intense awe.
For sure. Looking at the stars, maybe,
Yeah.
or incredible nature, or even a piece of music, or a deep human connection.
Where you feel tiny, but also connected to something vast.
Exactly. Those moments where you can't quite put words to it, can't quite measure the feeling. The text suggests maybe that feeling of being unable to grasp it fully.
Yeah.
That's not failure. That might be you bumping up against something real and significant.
So as we sort of wrap this up, the takeaway seems to be, if you're listening, you've ever felt that frustration, like, I just can't figure God out. Maybe that's okay. Maybe that feeling isn't a sign you're getting it wrong, but that you're actually in the right ballpark, facing something truly immense.
Yeah, it encourages a different posture. Instead of trying to shrink God down to fit into our current understanding.
Which is like trying to fit the ocean in the teacup again.
Right. Instead, allow our understanding to be stretched, to expand maybe, to try and accommodate his greatness, acknowledging our limits when facing the limitless.
And it talks about evidence too, but a different kind of evidence. It says God might not be provable in a lab setting.
Which fits the whole immeasurable idea.
But that he proves himself or demonstrates his reality in our lives. Personally, experientially.
Which is a very different kind of knowing. And it touches on thought itself, doesn't it? How our thoughts can't fully contain God.
Yet he communicates through our thoughts. He meets us there, uses the very tools that can't fully grasp him to connect with us.
It's paradoxical.
Definitely. It leads to this final idea they mention, the paradox of glory, that this immeasurable, infinite God makes himself known, not by being fully explained or quantified,
But how?
but by the light of his countenance, which speaks to closeness, presence, relationship, even while being totally beyond our full comprehension. Nearness and vastness held together.
This is the Countenance Project.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with, something to chew on after this deep dive. If God truly is immeasurable, how does that idea change the way you approach understanding? Well, everything else. The world around you, its complexities, its mysteries, and maybe even your own place within it all.